So guys, why is Africa poor? That is a very common question that is asked on Google. So many people living in Africa and outside of Africa want to know, why is a continent that is so rich in natural resources poor? I know it's a very mind-blowing problem. However, in this video, I want to be telling you about one of the major reasons why Africa is poor. And then in the next videos, I'll be telling you still some of the other major reasons why Africa is poor. Now, before I can get into this video, I need to tell you, those who don't know already, that Africa is a continent with 54 countries, each very independent from one another, and they have their own governments and their own issues, just like any other country in the world. So now, to be able to understand why Africa is poor, you need to look at it in terms of trade. Now, everyone knows, and those who don't know, that in order to be able to develop yourself, you need to be able to trade in goods and services with your neighbors or internationally, because that way you'll be getting in more money in terms of foreign exchange. So trade is a very, very, very important aspect when it comes to any country. So you need to know the World Trade Organization and what it stands for. So it's the largest international economic organization with 163 countries, and it represents 98% of global trade. Yeah, it's that big. It's a huge deal. However, the measures that are set at the WTO tend to put African countries at a disadvantage. So the question is, so what are those measures? Well, when it comes to food, guys, they are very strict when it comes to sanitary measures, and importing countries are advised to comply to the existing international measures. However, if an importing country wants to adopt more strict sanitary measures, they are allowed to do that, but they need to provide scientific justification as to why they're doing that. What do I mean? If, say for example, the United States or the UK wants to import goods from any African country, say Uganda or Ghana or Nigeria, the goods will come in and then they'll say, you know what, yes, we see that you tick the box of all the requirements as per the WTO standards. You tick all the requirements, but we as UK or as America, we feel that you need to also meet these other standards that we're putting in place because of ABCD. Now, if the African countries don't meet those standards, then the goods are rejected. They're sent back to where they came from. And that, my friends, is a loophole that many African countries tend to fall victim to, because they find that they can really, really meet up to most of the standards because they're really high. And most times when their goods are also rejected, they will not come out to say exactly what the sanitary issue is that they did not fulfill. So that's where things get wrong, and that's where African countries just get the short end of the stick, literally, when it comes to international trade. Plus, the decision makers at the WTO are developed countries, so of course you can imagine most of the policies that are put in place tend to favor these developed countries compared to African countries. You understand the gist, I'm very sure. And for several years in the 1900s, there was a fish ban from fish coming in from Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique based on sanitary issues. How the ban came about, I don't know. I'm just like you and me. I don't know, but all I know is that the ban was in place for a very, very long time. And Uganda is estimated to have lost $36.9 billion during that ban alone. And some of the requirements that are set by the WTO in terms of food safety are legitimate. True, we're not disputing that. They are legitimate. It's just that most African countries find it hard to meet those standards because of technical and research constraints. And research in Kenya showed that for farmers in Kenya to be able to meet up to the standards set by the WTO, they'll need to spend 10 times more than what they're currently spending. And Uganda will need to spend $300 million more on its honey processing plant to be able to comply to the requirements of the WTO. And for coffee growers in Uganda, they'll need to spend 200% more on coffee processing to be able to meet up to the requirements of the WTO. Now, do you understand what I mean by most African countries being disadvantaged? Yes, because most of them can't meet up to the requirements. I mean, the operating expenses are just beyond. So they end up not doing a lot of international trade like they would have if they were not as strict as they are. And I fully accept the standards of the European Union in terms of food safety, because the region has invested a lot of money in food systems for them to compromise on their standards. However, what cannot be overlooked are the loopholes that most African countries tend to fall victim to. And yes, like I'd said earlier, African countries still do international trade, but on a smaller scale compared to what would have been the reality. But all is not lost for Africa. There are solutions that have been put in place by different African countries. And what are those solutions? Before I can tell you those solutions, I want you to do me a favor. Hit the like button, and by doing that, you're letting the YouTube algorithm know that you find this video very informative and interesting, and then they'll recommend it to other people. So what are these solutions that African countries have put in place? Well, there's several bodies that have been put into place, and trade bodies, that is, to be able to resolve this issue of bans and very high tariffs on African goods. Bodies like the African Union have always been in place to support trade within African countries, and most common is also the East African Community organization, which is comprised of Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, Somalia. So generally, this body helps out the East African region to be able to do trade smoothly. And you know, it's something that's really looking up for East African countries. However, the game changer, you guys, is the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, where all African countries are in agreement with, and when it kicks off, oof, boy, there's no stopping. The future is looking bright for Africa when it comes to trade. African countries will be able to trade with one another smoothly, and a lot of bans, of course, will be done away with, and 90% of tariffs will be removed. And of course, you have to meet the standards of the different countries when it comes to sanitation and different measures that will be put in place. But it's much better than the WTO. In fact, it's the second biggest trade agreement after the WTO. So yeah, the future is looking bright for Africa. But I know if you're an African living in Africa, you're probably thinking, yes, Sarah, you're saying the future is looking bright for Africa, but we all know the biggest issue Africa faces is corruption. But this is what I want to tell you. Corruption is everywhere. Name one country where there's no corruption. There isn't. There's corruption everywhere, and there are successful businesses in Africa. And how do you think they do it? You just have to keep pushing through. You have to keep pushing through, because there's light at the end of the tunnel. You just have to believe in yourself and push through, because the future is bright. And do not give up, because change begins with you. It begins with me. So I hope you found this video very informative, and please do subscribe to the channel to be updated about the newly uploaded videos. And may the King of Peace be upon you, and I'll see you next time. Bye.